The snow had been falling since noon. By the time Daniel Hayes turned off Highway 82 and into the old part of Aspen, the streets were thick with it, white and clean and indifferent to the cold that had settled into his boots 2 hours ago. He drove the truck slowly, Lily in the passenger seat with her knees pulled to her chest and her breath fogging the window, drawing small stars in the condensation with the tip of her finger. She was 7 years old today. He had been reminding himself of that fact all morning. Through the broken furnace, through the overdue electric bill, through the half-empty refrigerator he had stared at for too long before closing it quietly so Lily wouldn't hear. 7 years old, a birthday. Whatever else this day was, it was that. He found a parking spot on Galena Street, wedged between an idling Range Rover and a brand-new Porsche SUV, their glossy flanks dusted with snow. Daniel's truck looked out of place the moment he cut the engine, the scratched door panel, the cracked side mirror held together with electrical tape, the faded decal from the roofing company he no longer worked for. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel and let himself breathe. "Daddy." He looked over. Lily had turned from the window and was watching him with those big gray eyes she had inherited from her mother eyes that seemed to understand more than they should, more than any 7-year-old had any right to. She was wearing the green wool hat he had found at Goodwill last October, the one with the small pom-pom that had started to unravel. She reached over and patted his hand on the steering wheel. "It's okay," she said. "We don't have to go in anywhere." He felt the sentence like a quiet blow to the chest. She had said it gently, without accusation. That was the worst part. A 7-year-old had learned to manage her expectations so carefully around him that she delivered comfort before disappointment had even arrived. "We're going," Daniel said. "Come on." He had been saving since September. Not much roofing work dried up in October, and the only steady money since then had come from odd jobs. A week of shoveling driveways for a property management company in Glenwood Springs, 2 weekends helping a retired couple in Basalt move furniture and pack boxes for a move to Tucson. He had kept the cash in a coffee can on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet, behind the cooking oil and the unopened box of oatmeal. He counted it every few days to make sure it was real. $140, folded into a rubber-banded stack. It had been Lily who pointed to the shop. 3 weeks ago, he had driven her through Aspen on the way back from a dentist appointment in Glenwood Springs, and they had passed along the main shopping corridor just as the holiday lights were going up. Lily had pressed her face against the window and said nothing for a long moment, and then, quietly, "Daddy, look at that one." He had looked. Aurora Luxe Jewelry. A corner shop with a lit window and a small display, a silver heart locket hanging on a thin velvet stand. Catching the light. He hadn't thought about it again until Lily brought it up at dinner the following week, unprompted, describing it in careful detail. The way it had a little clasp, the way it was heart-shaped but not too big, the way it looked like something her mother might have worn. Her mother had been gone for 4 years. Lily had been 3. She didn't talk about her often. Daniel had looked up the shop online that night. Silver heart locket, starting at $120. He had counted the coffee can money again. Now they walked down the snow-dusted sidewalk together. Lily's small hand in his, her boots making quiet crunching sounds against the salted pavement. The street smelled of wood smoke and cold pine. Around them, Aspen in winter was doing what it always did, presenting itself as a world apart. All soft, warm light through expensive glass, couples in fur-trimmed parkas, valets materializing at car doors like ceremony. Daniel kept his head straight and his grip on Lily's hand steady. Aurora Luxe Jewelry sat on the corner of Galena and Hopkins, its window glowing amber against the dark winter evening. There were 3 pieces in the display window: a diamond bracelet on a black pedestal, a pair of drop earrings in a velvet box, and there, on its own small stand in the center, the silver heart locket, just as Lily had described it. She stopped walking when she saw it. "It's still there," she whispered. Daniel looked down at her face, the wide eyes, the held breath, the absolute stillness of a child who had learned not to want things too loudly. He made himself push the door open. The warmth hit him first. Inside Aurora Luxe Jewelry, the temperature was precisely controlled, and the air smelled faintly of cedar and something floral he couldn't name. The floor was pale marble, the lighting soft and deliberate, designed to make everything behind glass appear to glow. Velvet-lined cases ran along 3 walls, each one lit from within. A crystal chandelier, not large but exquisite, hung at the center of the ceiling and scattered light across the polished surfaces like scattered coins. It was the kind of room that existed at a specific frequency. Daniel had been inside rooms like this before, back when he was still married, before the accident, before everything that came after, and even then he had felt the subtle wrongness of being the least expensive thing present. Now he felt it double. There were 4 other customers in the shop, 2 women in their 50s, both in long cashmere coats, studying a tray of rings near the far case. A man in his late 40s with silver-streaked hair and a watch that probably cost more than Daniel's truck, waiting near the counter with the practiced patience of someone accustomed to being served, and a young couple near the entrance, barely 20, whispering to each other over a case of earrings. The 2 women in cashmere looked up when the door opened. They looked at Daniel, then at Lily, then at each other. A glance so fast it might have been involuntary, but it was not. He had learned to read that glance years ago. It was the one that computed, in a single second, what kind of person had just entered a room, and whether the room needed adjusting. Lily stayed close beside him, her shoulder pressed against his thigh. A saleswoman materialized from somewhere near the back of the shop. She was in her early 30s, dark hair pulled neatly back, wearing a fitted black blazer over a white shirt. Her name tag read Victoria. She smiled, the automatic version, the one that preceded assessment. She looked at Daniel from the doorway to where she stopped, 3 feet away. He watched her take in the coat gray, pilling at the elbows, bought at a discount store in 2019. The work boots, dry now but permanently salt-stained. The calluses on his hands, the absence of any visible jewelry, watch, or leather goods. The smile settled into something smaller. "Good evening," she said. "Can I help you?" "Yes," Daniel said. "I'd like to see the silver heart locket, the one in the window." A pause. Brief. "Of course," Victoria said. "That one starts at $120. She said it evenly, neutrally, but she said it before he'd asked, and they both knew why. "That's fine," Daniel said. She held his gaze for a beat, recalibrating, then turned toward the window display. Victoria set the locket on a small velvet tray on the glass counter. Up close, it was more beautiful than it had appeared through the window, the silver catching the light in a warm, soft way. The heart shape clean and simple without being plain. It was about the size of a large postage stamp, with a fine chain and a clasp at the top. Lily reached out toward it and then pulled her hand back, unsure if she was allowed. "You can hold it," Daniel told her. She picked it up carefully, with both hands, turning it over. The back was smooth and flat. "Can you put words on it?" she asked. "Like initials?" "We do offer engraving," Victoria said. "There's a $15 fee." Lily looked up at her father. He was about to say yes when he heard the laugh. It came from the direction of the 2 women in cashmere. One of them, the taller one, had murmured something close to the other's ear, and both had covered their mouths in that particular way, the way that was meant to appear polite but was designed to be noticed. The man with the expensive watch glanced over without moving his head and then looked away again. Lily had heard it. He saw her shoulders drop slightly, just a fraction, but he knew every degree of his daughter's posture. She set the locket back on the velvet tray and stepped half a step closer to him. Victoria seemed not to notice, or chose not to. She was looking at the locket, then at Daniel, clearly doing the math of whether this transaction was going to require much more of her time. "The engraving would be done in about 3 business days, she said. "If you'd like it for tonight, it would just be the plain piece." "Tonight is fine," Daniel said. Another brief recalibration. From somewhere near the far case, the shorter of the 2 cashmere women made a sound not quite a word, more of a drawn breath followed by a murmur, and the taller one said, in a voice that was not quite quiet enough, "I'm not sure what happened to standards anymore." The young couple near the entrance pretended not to hear. The man with the watch looked at his phone. Lily's hand found Daniel's forearm. She didn't say anything. She just held on. He kept his face still and his eyes on the locket on the velvet tray. He was aware of his heartbeat in his ears and of the careful steadiness he had learned, through years of practice, to maintain in his chest even when everything in him wanted to harden or retreat. He had learned it first after the accident that took his wife, and then again in the ugly months after, and again when the roofing company let him go. He had become very good at holding still. "I'll take it," he said. Victoria opened her mouth, and at that moment, the door at the back of the shop swung open. It was the taller of the two cashmere women who pushed it to breaking. She had turned from the ring display and was now watching the exchange at the counter with undisguised irritation, as though Daniel's presence at the glass counter was a personal inconvenience to her, a disruption to the experience she had paid for by virtue of being the kind of person who shopped here. "Excuse me," she said, addressing Victoria directly. Her voice was the kind of voice that had never had cause to soften. "I've been waiting for assistance with the sapphire pieces for the better part of 15 minutes. Victoria glanced at her. "I'll be right with you, Mrs. Hargrove." Mrs. Hargrove's eyes moved to Daniel, then to Lily, then back to Victoria with a pointed stillness. "Perhaps you could finish up with," she paused, the pause doing its work. "This. First, some of us have dinner reservations." The short woman with her tittered softly. Victoria looked at Daniel, and for just a moment her professionalism cracked, or rather, bent, and something shifted behind her eyes, something that said she had decided which customer mattered more. "Sir," she said, quietly but unmistakably, "if you'd like to think it over, we have a brochure." "He said he'll take it." Lily had said it. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. The girl was 7 years old, in an unraveling wool hat, standing on the wrong side of a velvet tray in the most expensive jewelry shop on the street. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't cried. She simply repeated what her father had said, clearly and calmly, with a steadiness that made the room feel, for a moment, deeply rearranged. Daniel looked down at her. She looked up at him. Her eyes were bright, not with tears, with something else. The determined brightness of a child who has absorbed too much and has quietly decided she has absorbed enough. "Daddy," she said, softer now, "it's okay if we go. I don't really need it." Those words again, the same ones from the truck. I don't really need it. 7 years old, and she had already learned the grammar of giving up gracefully. He felt something turn over in his chest, not quite anger, not quite grief, but a combination of both that had no clean name. He was about to answer her when the door at the back of the room opened and the whole temperature of the shop changed. The man who stepped out from the back office was perhaps 60, with the particular unhurried quality of someone who had spent a long time becoming comfortable with himself. He was not large, but he carried himself with the kind of ease that takes decades to accumulate, the ease of a person who has survived difficult things and knows what still matters. Silver hair, a dark blazer, no tie, wire-rimmed glasses pushed up on his forehead. His name was Gerald Whitmore. He owned Aurora Lux Jewelry. He had owned it for 23 years. He appeared not because he had heard the exchange. His office at the back was partly soundproofed against the ambient noise of the shop, but because it was 6:30 and he made a point of walking the floor once every evening to see how things were going. It was a habit he had kept since the beginning, in the days when he had been the only employee, opening and closing alone, adjusting every velvet tray himself. He stopped when he came through the door and looked at the room. He could read a room the way some people read weather. He saw Victoria at the counter, her posture subtly defensive. He saw Mrs. Hargrove standing with her arms folded in the particular configuration of entitled impatience. He saw the man at the counter, tall, broad-shouldered, worn coat, work boots, and the small girl beside him with her hand on his arm and a pom-pom hat with a fraying top. and he saw the velvet tray on the counter with the silver heart locket on it. "What's going on?" he asked, not loudly, just clearly. Mrs. Hargrove turned. "Mr. Whitmore, I was simply asking your staff to attend to paying customers." Gerald Whitmore looked at her without expression. Then he looked at Victoria, who said nothing. Then he looked at Daniel, and at Lily, and he went very still. His eyes moved across the man's face slowly, the way you search for something you're not sure you'll find. The jaw, the forehead, the particular way he held his shoulders, as though braced against something just out of sight, and then the scar, a thin, pale crescent just above the left eyebrow, barely visible but there. Gerald Whitmore felt something shift in his chest, something old and heavy that he had carried for a long time, and had never expected to have the opportunity to set down. "Daniel," he said. The man at the counter looked up. "Yes?" Whitmore crossed the floor. The room was so quiet that the sound of Gerald Whitmore's shoes on the marble floor was the loudest thing in it. He stopped a few feet from the counter and looked at Daniel fully, for the first time. Not the quick sweep of assessment that Victoria and the other customers had given him, but the slow, deliberate recognition of someone seeing a face they had last seen in entirely different circumstances. "Daniel Hayes," he said. Not a question anymore. Daniel studied the older man's face. There was something familiar in it, he couldn't have said what, exactly. The eyes, maybe. The particular steadiness in them. "I'm sorry," Daniel said. "I don't." "February," said Whitmore. 12 years ago. Highway 82, out past Basalt. There was a snowstorm. A bad one. He paused. "My car had gone off the shoulder into the ditch. It was nearly 11 at night." Something shifted in Daniel's expression. "I remember a man stopping," he said slowly. "Older truck. I got out to." He stopped. "Yes," said Whitmore quietly. The details came back in pieces, the way they did when something had been filed away under a category called ordinary. An icy night, the heater and his own truck going, a pair of headlights angled wrong off the side of the road. He had pulled over without thinking much about it. A man in a dark coat, standing in the wind beside a car buried nose first in a snowbank. No cell signal, no other cars. Daniel had had a tow chain and a strong truck, and 2 hours before he needed to be anywhere. He had pulled the car out, waited until the man's engine turned over, and waved him on. He had not thought about it in years. "I tried to give you money," Whitmore said. "You wouldn't take it. It was just a tow," Daniel said. "It was not just a tow." Whitmore said it quietly but with great deliberateness. "My phone was dead. The temperature was in the low single digits. I had been there for 40 minutes. I am not a young man, and I was not dressed for it." He looked at Daniel steadily. 3 other vehicles passed before you stopped." 3. The room was absolutely silent. Mrs. Hargrove had not moved from where she stood, but something had left her posture. The rigid certainty of it, the folded arms. The short woman beside her had stopped smiling. The man with the expensive watch was looking at the floor. Victoria had gone very still behind the counter. Lily looked from the older man to her father and back again. Her head tilted slightly to one side, working out what this was. "I'm sorry I didn't recognize you," Daniel said. "It's been 12 years, said Whitmore. "And you're in a different coat." A small, dry thing that was almost a smile, though not by much. He reached out and shook Daniel's hand. Not briefly. He held it for a moment. "I have thought about that night many times," he said. "I have tried to remember the face of the man who stopped. I wasn't sure I had it right." He looked at the scar above the eyebrow. "But that's distinctive. You had it then." "Since I was 12, Daniel said. "Bicycle." Whitmore nodded. Then he turned around and looked at the room. Gerald Whitmore looked at his shop, really looked at it the way you sometimes look at a familiar place after an absence and see it for the first time. He looked at the 2 women in cashmere. He looked at the man with the watch. He looked at Victoria. When he spoke, his voice was composed and quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "The man you have been making uncomfortable," he said, pulled my car out of a ditch on a night that could have killed me. He did it without being asked, without hesitation, and without accepting anything in return. He paused. I have never been able to repay that. I have never had the opportunity. He looked at Victoria directly. I want to know what was said to him. Victoria opened her mouth and closed it again. Her composure, the professional gloss that had been flawless 10 minutes ago, had gone slightly transparent. I was simply assisting. Victoria. He said only her name. That was enough. She looked down at the counter. Mrs. Hargrove expressed some concern about there was an implication that our clientele. She stopped. I may have suggested he consider coming back another time. A long pause. Mrs. Hargrove, said Whitmore, turning. The tall woman in the cashmere coat had straightened. She was not unaccustomed to being addressed by name in this shop. She was a regular, had been for 4 years, spent without hesitation and tipped generously at the holidays. She had, until approximately 90 seconds ago, felt entirely within her rights in this room. This man came in tonight to buy his daughter a birthday gift, Whitmore said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. That is the only qualification required to receive courteous service in my store. That is the only qualification that has ever been required. Mrs. Hargrove held his gaze for a moment, then looked away. The short woman beside her had gone very quiet. Whitmore turned back to Daniel. Something in his face had shifted. The businesslike composure had softened into something more personal, more direct. What did you come in for tonight? Daniel gestured at the locket on the velvet tray. The silver heart. For her birthday. Whitmore looked at the locket, then at Lily. He crouched down slowly, with the deliberateness of a man whose knees reminded him of his age until he was at her eye level. And how old are you today? He asked. Lily studied him for a moment. 7, she said. 7. He nodded gravely, as though this were a significant number deserving of reflection. That's an important age. My teacher says so too, Lily said. He smiled. The first real smile the room had seen from anyone in quite a while. I'd like to show you something, he said to her. Is that all right? Gerald Whitmore straightened and went behind the counter himself, stepping around Victoria, who moved aside with a quiet efficiency that had replaced its earlier condescension. He reached beneath the counter and brought out a small key, then opened the case on the far right, the one that was kept locked and did not have a visible price tag in the window. He lifted something out carefully and set it on a fresh velvet tray. It was a locket, heart-shaped. Silver, but a different grade heavier, with a slight warmth to the tone that set it apart from the window piece. The clasp was a small leaf, engraved at the edges. It caught the light in a way that was harder to dismiss than beauty, more like recognition. This one is not in the case because it was made as a commissioned piece, Whitmore said. The commission fell through. I've been trying to decide what to do with it for 8 months. He set it on the counter in front of Lily. She looked at it without touching it. Her eyes were very wide. Then Whitmore turned to Victoria. I'd like you to apologize to Mr. Hayes, he said. And I'd like it to be genuine. The word genuine landed with weight, not like a command, like a standard. Victoria looked at Daniel. The professional composure was gone entirely now. What remained was something more real and less comfortable. I'm sorry, she said, for how I spoke to you, and for letting you feel unwelcome here. She paused. You deserved better from me. It was not a long apology, but it was specific. And specific was what mattered. Daniel nodded once. Thank you, he said. He meant it. He was not a man who required anyone to grovel, and he was not performing magnanimity. He was genuinely, quietly relieved that it was over, that the worst part of the evening had been given a proper ending, instead of being left to calcify into something he'd carry home. Whitmore looked at Mrs. Hargrove again. The tall woman met his gaze. A long moment passed between them, the particular, uncomfortable kind that occurs when a person is being asked, without words, to examine what they've done and decide who they want to be about it. She walked over to Daniel. I was rude, she said, flat, unadorned. I apologize. She did not wait for his response. She walked back to her companion, picked up her bag, and left the shop. The door closed softly behind her. The short woman followed, without looking at anyone. The man with the expensive watch had already put his phone away. He caught Daniel's eye briefly, gave a small nod, the kind that carries no message except acknowledgement, and returned to examining the ring case with sudden renewed interest. The room exhaled. Whitmore turned back to the counter, and to Lily, who had been watching everything with the precise, unblinking attention of a child who understands that something important is happening and is determined not to miss any of it. "Now then," said Whitmore, "tell me about your evening." Lily was not shy, exactly. She was careful. There was a difference. Shy children retreated. Lily simply evaluated, quietly and thoroughly, before she committed. She had been doing it since she was 3, watching the world from behind Daniel's leg at the park, at school pickup, at every new place. But once she decided a thing was safe, she opened entirely, the way windows do when you undo the latch. She told Gerald Whitmore about her birthday, about the pancakes her father had made that morning, the ones he'd arranged into the shape of a rabbit on her plate, even though the ears were uneven, about her teacher, Miss Randall, who had given the class an extra recess in honor of Lily's birthday, which Lily suspected was not standard policy but did not question. About the card her Aunt Carolyn had sent from Portland with a $5 bill folded inside, which Lily had decided to save rather than spend because it had Aunt Carolyn's handwriting on it and that felt important. Whitmore listened. He asked questions. He had the quality rare in adults and almost non-existent in wealthy adults, in Daniel's experience of being genuinely interested in what a child was saying without performing interest. He laughed in the right places. He did not talk down. At some point, Victoria brought out a small glass of apple juice for Lily, unprompted, and set it on the counter without comment. Lily thanked her. Victoria said, "You're welcome," and it came out differently than anything she had said earlier in the evening, quieter, without architecture. After a while, Whitmore gestured at the larger locket on the velvet tray. "What do you think of that one?" Lily looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at the original locket, the window piece, still sitting on the first velvet tray where Victoria had placed it. She picked up the commissioned piece, turned it over. The back had a small engraved border, floral, barely there. She opened the clasp and looked inside. Empty, of course, but the inside was polished to a mirror finish, so for a moment she was looking at a tiny, curved reflection of herself. She set it down. Then she picked up the window piece. "This one," she said. Whitmore raised an eyebrow slightly, not with disappointment, but with genuine curiosity. "The first one?" "Yes," Lily said. She held it up toward the light. "It's the one I saw through the window. That's the one I wanted." A small pause. "I saw it 3 weeks ago," she said, "and it looked like something my mom might have worn. And it still looks like that. The other one is really beautiful," she added carefully, with the conscientiousness of a child who has been taught not to seem ungrateful. "But this is the one." The room was very quiet. Daniel looked at his daughter and felt something in his chest loosen some long-held tension he hadn't realized he was carrying until it moved. She was 7 years old and she knew what she wanted and why, and she said so clearly, without apology or performance. She had not chosen the larger thing because it was offered. She had not let the pressure of the moment change what she already knew was right. He looked at Whitmore. The older man was looking at Lily with an expression that was not easy to name, something between admiration and the particular tenderness that people feel when they encounter something that confirms their oldest convictions. "The first one it is," he said. He looked at Daniel. "The engraving. Did you want initials?" "L.H., Daniel said. "Lily Hayes." "Give me 15 minutes, said Whitmore. He took the locket and disappeared into the back. The shop was quieter now. The man with the watch had made his purchase and gone. The young couple near the entrance had drifted out as well, newly engaged, holding hands and pressing their faces together as the door closed behind them. Victoria was reorganizing the ring tray at the far case. slowly, with a carefulness that was doing double duty as penance. Daniel stood at the counter with Lily beside him, and they looked into the lit cases. She pointed to things and asked questions. What kind of stone is that? Why does that one look different from this one? How do people learn how to cut diamonds? And he answered what he knew, which was not much, and admitted what he didn't, which was most of it. She didn't mind. She liked the questions as much as the answers. She was, in this way, very much his. After 12 minutes, Whitmore came back. He set a small square box on the counter, navy blue, with a white ribbon. Inside, nested in a cushion of white silk, was the silver heart locket. On the back, in small, clean letters, L. H. And beneath the locket, a small folded card. Lily opened it. The handwriting was careful, old-fashioned, in dark ink. She read it slowly, her lips moving slightly the way they did when she was being sure. Then she looked up at Gerald Whitmore. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. "Happy birthday, Lily." Daniel reached for his wallet. Whitmore shook his head once, briefly. "No," he said. "I'm paying," Daniel said. "That's not, Daniel." Whitmore looked at him directly. "I have been carrying the weight of that night on Highway 82 for 12 years. Not because it made me feel good, it didn't. Because I couldn't repay it. I drove home that night and I thought, if I ever see that man again. And here you are." He paused. "Let me." A long moment. Daniel put his wallet away. He extended his hand, and Whitmore took it. And they shook the way people shake when what passes between them is not a transaction but a closing of something long open. "How is she?" Daniel asked finally. "The shop? Business? Good," said Whitmore. "Better than it deserves to be, some days." He glanced at the counter where the evening had unfolded. Tonight being an example. He looked at Victoria, who did not look up but whose posture acknowledged him. "We'll do better." "I know you will," Daniel said. He picked up the navy box and held it while Lily put on her hat, the green one with the pom-pom. Tilted slightly to the left, the way she always wore it. She took his hand. They walked out together through the glass door and into the winter. The snow had slowed, but not stopped. The street was quieter now. The busy part of the evening moved on, only a few figures moving between the pools of lamplight. The cold hit them fresh, the particular, clarifying cold of a mountain night after warmth, the kind that makes you feel the edges of yourself. Lily reached up her free hand. "Can I hold the box?" He gave it to her. She held it against her chest with both hands, carefully. They walked toward the truck. Their footprints filled slowly with new snow behind them. "Daddy." "Yeah, what did it say?" "In the card." "You didn't read it. I figured it was for you." She thought about this. "I'll tell you when we get to the truck." They got to the truck. Daniel started the engine and let it warm. Lily opened the box in her lap and unfolded the card and read it aloud in the dark cab, her voice steady and unhurried, sounding older than 7 and exactly 7 at the same time. "Kindness always finds its way back," she read. "Not because the world is fair, but because people like your father make it so. Wear this locket and remember, the most valuable things are never the ones in cases. They're the ones we carry with us. G. W." She folded the card and put it back in the box and closed the lid and held it in her lap. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the town in its patient, unhurried way. Daniel turned on the heat. The old truck's heater took a moment before warm air began to move. He reached over and tucked a loose strand of hair back under Lily's pom-pom hat. She leaned her head against his shoulder and looked out the window at the falling snow. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Lily said, "Daddy, did you know you were going to help him? That night on the highway?" "No," he said. "I just stopped." She considered this with the thoroughness she brought to everything. "I think that's the important part," she said. He put the truck in drive. They pulled slowly away from the curb and out into the quiet, snow-softened street, and the lights of Aurora Luxe jewelry grew smaller in the rearview mirror and then disappeared around a corner and the night opened up ahead of them, the long road home, the dark mountains on either side, the sky flat and white with cloud, the snow falling and falling and falling the way it always had and always would in this part of the world, with no preference and no memory and no idea at all what it had witnessed tonight. The first warm days came to Aspen in March, tentative at first, a single afternoon of almost thaw, then another, then a whole week in which the snowpack retreated from the lower elevations and mud appeared on the shoulders of the roads, and the aspens along the river began the first, barely visible preparations for green. Daniel had found steady work by then. A construction firm out of Glenwood Springs had taken him on in January, hired on the basis of a recommendation from the couple in Basalt he'd helped with their move. The pay was not extraordinary, but it was consistent, and consistent was what mattered. He was on the crew framing a new commercial building in Carbondale, and he drove out before dawn each morning with coffee in a thermos, and came back in the early evening with sawdust on his jacket and a particular tiredness that was different from the bad kind. The kind that comes from having done something real. Lily wore the locket every day. She wore it under her shirt at school not because she was hiding it, but because it felt right to keep it close, a private thing. On weekends, she wore it outside her sweater and sometimes held it while she read or watched the birds at the feeder Daniel had hung from the kitchen window eve in late January. She had not forgotten Gerald Whitmore. She had mentioned him 3 or 4 times in the way children mention things they're quietly filing away casually, tangentially, as though the thought simply surfaced. Mr. Whitmore said 7 was an important age. Do you think 8 will be important too? Or, do you think he still remembers us? I think so, Daniel told her. He was right about that. In the second week of March, an envelope arrived at the house addressed to Daniel Hayes, with a return address on Galena Street, Aspen. Inside was a short note on cream stationery and a business card. The note read, Daniel, I have a friend in Glenwood Springs who runs a property development firm. He mentioned over dinner last week that he is looking for a reliable site foreman for a multi-phase residential project starting in spring. I took the liberty of mentioning your name. I hope that is not overstepping. If you'd like to follow up, his number is on the card. He's expecting your call. Gerald Whitmore. P.S. Tell Lily that 8 is also an important age. Daniel set the note on the kitchen table and looked at it for a while. Then he picked up the business card. The name on it was Robert Ashby, with a Glenwood Springs address. He called the number. Robert Ashby picked up on the second ring, said Gerald told me about you, and asked if Daniel could come in the following Tuesday. The interview lasted 45 minutes. By the time Daniel got back to his truck in the parking lot, he had a job offer in his hand site foreman, full-time, with benefits, starting April 1st. He sat in the truck for a moment. He didn't call anyone right away. He sat with it for a minute. The way you sometimes need to sit with a thing that is genuinely good before you do anything with it, just to feel its real weight. Then he called Lily's school and asked them to tell her that her dad would be picking her up today. He was there early. He watched her come through the double doors with her backpack and her green hat, scanning the line of cars the way she always did, and then finding him recognizing the truck, the wave, and her whole face shifting into the particular brightness that was hers alone, that no one else in the world had, that had been brightening the worst years of his life from the inside out. She ran to him. He caught her, standing in the school parking lot with the late winter sun going sideways and gold across the mountain peaks. He held his daughter and thought about a night 12 years ago when he had stopped a truck on a dark highway without knowing why, and a night in February when he had walked into a warm and difficult room because a 7-year-old had once pointed at a window. He thought about the particular, invisible thread that runs through the choices we make when no one is keeping score. Lily pulled back and looked up at him. She was already reaching for the locket through her coat, the habit she had developed of checking that it was there. Is it good news? She asked. She could always tell. Yeah, he said. It's good news. She nodded, like she had been expecting it. Good, she said. Mr. Whitmore said kindness finds its way back. She took his hand and pulled him toward the truck. Can we get pancakes? Yeah, said Daniel Hayes. We can get pancakes. They walked into the long afternoon light together, and the mountains above Glenwood Springs held their snow a little while longer, and the aspens along the river put out their first green, and somewhere in Aspen on Galena Street, a man named Gerald Whitmore locked up his shop for the evening, turned off the lights in the cases one by one, and stepped out into air that smelled, finally, like spring.